Welcome everyone to today's Edison Electric Institute webinar, Managing Supply Chain Risk, Critical Resources for the Transition. My name is Vanessa Ferrero and I'm a manager for international programs at EEI. Today's session is part of EEI's Destination 2050 Dialogues, our COP26 webinar series focused on the critical issues for the clean energy transition. We are excited to welcome three speakers today: Tomczak, Chief Procurement Officer and Vice President of Corporate Services at DTE Energy; Enrique Riveroll, Vice President of Customer Service at Maritime Electric; and Alisdair Reid, Head of Engineering at Orion, New Zealand. They will be joined by Lawrence Jones, Vice President for International Programs at EEI. This session is a dialogue, so we encourage you to ask questions for our speakers using the chat. Throughout the session, Lawrence will aim to incorporate as many of them as possible into the conversation. Without further ado, I will turn this over to Lawrence to get started.
Thank you, Vanessa, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everybody. Welcome to this second or third in our series of COP26 webinar as we head to Glasgow. Focus of this webinar is on the issue of supply chain. As we all know, global supply chains are extremely important going forward. It's going to be critical for the energy transition. Not only should it be affordable in terms of making sure that the delivery can be brought to the customers, but it also needs to be resilient. As we've seen in recent months, there has been a series of initiatives around the world that have definitely geared on trying to address the supply chain issues. But I think we can no doubt say that supply chain is definitely going to be front and center going forward for the next year or so, not just from the energy perspective, but from the society more broadly, as we see ships around the world waiting to dock and to unload and to move on to their next destination. So today, the focus is going to be on the energy system. It's going to be on the energy sector, specifically the electricity sector, and we're delighted to be having a conversation with three utilities from three different parts of the world, from Canada, as far the way down in Christchurch, from Canada, in the western coast of Canada, and then also from the US, DTE Energy. Gentlemen, welcome. Let's get going right away. So we'll start with you, Tony. For those who are listening who may not know anything about DTE Energy, can you just tell us a little bit about the company, what you guys do, and then we'll move on to Alisdair and then Enrique. So go first, Tony.
Sounds good. Yes, we're a utility for gas and electric in the state of Michigan, and we are headquartered in Detroit. We have, I think, 2.1 million customers on the electric side and 1.2 million customers on the gas side. So a little over 3 million customers, and just trying to provide the best service we can to our customers.
Yeah, great. Alisdair, let's go down to you in New Zealand. Tell us a little bit about Christchurch and Orion.
Yeah, morning everyone. We are a bit smaller than Tony's company. We're an electricity distribution business in Christchurch, which is the second biggest city in New Zealand and the biggest city in the South Island. We serve over 200,000 connection points in the city of Christchurch and the rural area. Our voltages go up to 66,000 volts, all the way down to supply voltage. We've got over 200 employees here at Orion, and our primary contracting partner, Kinetics, who we own, they are a similar size. So by scale, we're one of the bigger ones in New Zealand, but on a global scale, we're pretty small. So we're pretty agile in that way. Christchurch, bit overcast, probably about 16 degrees at the minute, and it's just after 9 a.m.
Well, thank you so much, Alisdair. We'll get back to you and talk a little bit about Christchurch in the context of some of the things that's happening. Enrique, let's go over to you.
Yes, hi everybody. So Maritime Electric is a wholly owned subsidiary of Fortis Inc. Fortis has 10 utility operations across North America and the Caribbean. So we're located in Prince Edward Island, Canada. It's on the East Coast in a region we call Atlantic Canada. We service about 85,000 customers, which is about 92% of the province. There's also a small municipal utility as well that serves the other 8%. We have about 200 employees. We purchase most of our energy, about 80% of our energy, from New Brunswick Power. The other 20%, 22% or so are from provincially owned wind farms. This energy from off island is delivered via 4 submarine cables that are owned by the government of PEI. Maritime Electric is a fully integrated, has a fully integrated system, generation, transmission, distribution. We own about 6,000 kilometers of transmission and distribution lines. We have some generation, a thermal generating station that we're currently being decommissioned, and we have about 90 megawatts of combustion turbines as well.
Thank you. Well, so as we all know, the global supply chains are on the front page of newspapers 24/7. You just can't miss it. The COVID-19 pandemic, semiconductor shortages, reliance on critical raw materials from a few countries. All of these things have sort of exposed the systemic weaknesses and vulnerabilities in the global supply chain. But I think let's start with the COVID-19 pandemic, which is one of the first things that highlighted the importance of supply chain. And maybe can each of you just share any lessons your company learned in terms of dealing with some of the issues around PPE and some of the shortages that occur during the pandemic? Let's start with Tony first.
Yeah, I would say that was really the first, because it's not typically things that we do buy. We had to find sources for masks, hand sanitizer, wipes, all the thermometers, you name it. And we found out that many of these things were not available in the United States, not readily, and in the types of units that we were looking for. So we had to go global. And we had to go to China for much of it. Hand sanitizer, we saw local distilleries change over and start to make hand sanitizer. So we were able to get a local flavor. But what we found was the local entrepreneurs that typically didn't, provide these types of supplies quickly wheeled and found ways of building supply chains to different parts of the world in order to get these types of PPE and supplies. So we had to be very nimble. We knew that we had to find these things in order to protect our employees so they can do their job every day. Because the one thing that we knew was our customers needed light, they needed heat, and the ability to cook. And so if we weren't able to provide those things, we'd have some major problems beyond the fact that we were in a pandemic, right? And people were pretty unhappy and not knowing what was going on. So our supply chain group did a fabulous job in finding these supplies and keeping our business alive and keeping our employees safe. So that, it morphed into other things, finding the ability to do tests and things like that. And our medical groups did fabulous working with the local hospital systems here to provide vaccines. But it just was a real test to be nimble and be able to wheel.
Alisdair, you guys in New Zealand were heralded as one of the most success stories when it came to dealing with COVID. Was that also something that you felt at the utility level in terms of dealing with PPEs and some of these shortages?
Yeah, it's quite a different context for New Zealand because of the very low case numbers that we had at the beginning of the pandemic. We went into a national lockdown for about a couple of months in early 2020, but we soon emerged from that, and life was pretty much normal between sort of May 2020 and up until about August this year. So we really didn't feel the impacts that the rest of the world felt. So we were very it was good government and good management and a bit of luck at the same time. So we feel quite fortunate that we've been able to live a relatively normal life in these times. PPE was never a major issue for us. The major problems for us were because of what was going on in the rest of the world, because geographically we're a long way from where the majority of our equipment is manufactured. For example, we get most of our transformers out of Asia, a lot of our switch gear from there as well. A lot of our really high voltage switch gear comes from the US, for example. So we were seeing the impacts from outside of New Zealand affecting us here. We don't manufacture a lot of equipment in New Zealand. The equipment that we do source in New Zealand, such as wood poles, were readily available. However, for example, we get all of our cable manufactured, well, the majority of our cable manufactured in New Zealand, but of course they rely on raw materials from overseas and they rely on shipping. So the major impacts to our business were shipping, and we're a low volume user of equipment compared to global companies such as the US and Canada. So our kind of biggest risk really is still the fact that we're geographically remote from where our equipment comes from, and shipping has become a significant issue for us. So those are the main issues that we've been dealing with. But yeah, so far we've been fairly lucky compared to the rest of the world. Yep.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. I think it's interesting. Both you and Tony sort of alluded to this whole issue of manufacturing, and it's interesting that you guys are actually importing some of your equipment from the US, which is something most people may not know. So I think it's a good piece of information. So Enrique, Fortis, you guys are in multiple countries, so your situation must be perhaps very different to some extent. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys went through the pandemic as it relates to PPE and other shortages?
Yeah, so I mean, with Fortis, we're across North America from the East Coast, West Coast, southern U.S. in Arizona. In New York, we have there's a utility there, and New York was really bad in the early days. And for us in Prince Edward Island, we were very similar to Alisdair. We didn't really see much of an impact with respect to COVID. I mean, similar to everyone else, we had difficulty, getting masks, hand sanitizer. But for our company, we only have 200 employees, so we were able to get local seamstress to make us some masks, and we still are supporting local when it comes to that stuff. With respect to sort of the supply chain, we didn't really have an impact early in the pandemic, and we saw a lot of value was realized in fostering long-term relationships with our critical vendors. Those long-term relationships paid off. The key alliance partners that we've had for so many years, 20 years, 30 years, worked really well. Our supply chain groups across all the companies, they have supplier diversity, which was key to ensuring resiliency. Some utilities have double, triple sourcing when it comes to certain types of equipment and material. Multiple supplier sources minimize the impact during the past year and a half, 2 years, right? So we're starting to see the impact now, and I know we're going to get into that, but early on in the pandemic, very little impact.
In recent months, we're beginning to now see supply chain shortages in terms of actual equipment that's impacting the grid. So we see PV shortages in some parts of the world. We're beginning to see other equipment shortages. I was on a call with folks in Australia a couple of weeks ago. They were seeing chip issues, smart metering. Let's talk a little bit about, how are these other supply shortages beginning to impact your business, and what perspectives you have on that? Maybe we start with Tony again.
Yeah, great question. Here in the States, there's some real basic economic issues, and probably not something we've really seen before, at least not in the near past. We have basic issues like trucking, right? So we don't have enough drivers to move product and equipment from one end of the country to another. We don't have people to unload containers off of ships. You had mentioned that earlier, Lawrence, and yeah, I think it's just, so you have some real basic bottlenecks. You have issues with the one a story I tell. We're in automotive world here in Detroit, right? We have the big three, and One of the auto companies was having a job fair talking about being able to work on the line, with great benefits for $15.87 an hour. And in days past, that would be a fantastic job to be able to go and do. Today, not so much. You can go work at McDonald's for $15 an hour and get a bonus after 1 month of $1,000. So the whole level of, wage and rate has shifted. It's changed. We don't know if it's going to be permanent or if it's going to be temporary. Usually these things do have some permanency to them, but the desire to be able to want to work in a factory or manufacturing or work with your hands isn't so much anymore until some reckoning around competitiveness comes about. And so that is changing the world. And we're seeing that ripple through our supply chain where, COVID caused issues where people were not going to work and not going to work in the way that they did in the past. And things changed for folks. They found different ways of being able to make money. Some of it being sustained by the government, some of it looking at different ways to being able to do things and make money. And they're not going back necessarily to the jobs that they had. We also see people that were near retirement deciding, yes, humility comes in. We're in a pandemic. I need to spend as much time with my family as I can. I'm not going to work anymore. So you see a lot of things happening with being able to transfer knowledge and ability and things like that. So we have many job openings at my company, but it's a very, very competitive environment in ways that we had never seen before. So a lot of dynamics there and some real basic things around labor, being able to move stuff across the country. It's affecting all the different sectors.
What about you, Enrique? Enrique, what about you from your perspective?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. So our operations are starting to be affected now, right? And I think, in the short term, we were somewhat protected from what I will call the hoarding that it was occurring. And utilities you were generally prepared for storm seasons and having increased inventory. However, we are operating in a global pandemic, so long lead time products are being reassessed to withstand shortages. We are looking to increase our inventory levels without hoarding and improving our forecasting. We are looking at alternative suppliers and sources so that we can mitigate risk. We are internally looking to improve our material visibility to monitor inventory levels so we don't get caught. And so, although in the short term we weren't affected, I think in the medium to long term, we're going to have some issues, and labor shortages is also going to be one of them.
Yeah, we will come back to this point about redesigning the supply chain because I'd love to get your thoughts on that. But let's go to Alisdair and let's hear a little bit what's happening in New Zealand in terms of supply chain issues beyond just the pandemic.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear from Tony and Enrique about the issues being internal to your environment and your part of the world. But again, for us, the main issues have been as a result of not because of internal shipping within New Zealand or internal staff availability. It's really been because of what's happening elsewhere in the world. So we've got a really a reliable stores contractor who Kinetics, who we partner with. We keep about 6 months worth of stock at any given time. That was a decision we made in early 2020. Yes, that may sound like hoarding, but we really had no option at the time. It's the little things that trip you up. You can deal with the delays for the major equipment because you can plan to plan in that regard, but it's the little things that trip you up, such as a couple of examples. Our cable manufacturer couldn't get resin beads into New Zealand because of a shipping issue. There's been ships coming into New Zealand that have decided, on their journey not to come to New Zealand and gone away again, so which has got some of our equipment on it. Container shortages have been a major issue for us and our suppliers. When we talk to the shipping agents in New Zealand and ask them for an update, they can't give us an update about where things are. So who knows where our equipment goes before it gets here. When it comes from, say, Atlanta, Georgia, we don't know where it goes before it gets here. So it's the little things that trip us up, such as cable shortages, little things like joint terminations. But I guess because of New Zealand's geographic location, we do tend to stock a lot of equipment anyway for things. I mean, I'm not sure if you're aware, but about 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, Christchurch was hit by a significant earthquake. So there was a lot of lessons learned by Orion at that point in terms of equipment resilience. So that has actually held us in good stead during this pandemic. Yeah, look, it's the external factors that really have been a problem for us. Mm-hmm. Is it going to go away soon? I'm not sure, but I think a developing risk I would suggest might be the skills shortage in the industry, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, so and feel free to jump in here, Greg, and tune in to respond. But there's one question that has come up, and I want to throw out this from Gregory, and he's asking about, using data and analytics to try to address some of these challenges. Something you want to talk about, Tony and Enrique, because I know you guys have been looking at the inventory, looking at your supply chain, looking at suppliers. How have data and analytics been used?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. It's like a perfect storm right now in regards to what's going on here in the United States. Not only do you have pandemic issues and all the things rippling through the manufacturing sector, but you also have almost every utility in the country is pursuing hardening their system and moving towards renewables and all the pieces that are important to how we're going to move in our future. It's a big step in regards to the amount of what we need. And it's not just one company, it's multiple companies. So, trying to do some analytics and understanding, past really is okay, but, it doesn't really calculate to what's going to happen in the future. So we're trying to put some models together to understand in more detail in regards to just how much a product, how many pieces of equipment, how many components are we really going to need in order to do the work that we see going on in the future. And then through EEI, through a CPO forum, we're talking about bringing all of our company's needs together in order to work with our suppliers to have them invest, right? Invest in increasing their capacity, invest in being able to meet the demands of not what's happened in the past, but what we see going on into the future, and not just for one company, but for all of us. In the end, we all put up wire and cable, we have transformers, we have all the pieces of equipment we're talking about. But if we don't see a fundamental shift in our supply chain in regards to what they can do, we're going to have a hard road for a long time here in a time when we want to expand and grow and to make things better. So it's an interesting time for sure.
Enrique, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, whatever software or technology, you own or currently looking to purchase to improve your supply chain, the one big thing I think is important is the visibility, right? So, typically we have software that's, unique for one group, and, we need to be able to open up this software and analytics to all the business units within the company, whether it be engineering, operations, supply chain. We need sort of better visibility. We need real-time analytics. I think there's a term they use in the software industry called, algorithm intelligence, that sort of predicts, what you're going to need into the future and just help with your, decisions that you need to make. So, I guess it does. I don't think it really matters on what software technology you use. You need to open it up, and the software needs to be flexible and able to provide, sort of real-time data.
Yeah, and as I talk to electric companies around the world, one of the things I find fascinating in this space is that everybody seems to be trying to tackle this big problem, and the approaches are somewhat similar, but there are a lot of differences here and there in terms of the domestic policy, in terms of the trade policies that are inherent in those different countries. And so I think one of the good things of trying to have this sort of a dialogue, and the one we're going to have in January or February, most of an international dialogue on supply chain to really understand how do you redesign the supply chain. I want to pick up on something you said, Tony, in terms of we have a lot of big things to do. Nothing bigger than what is going to happen in Glasgow. With all of these proclamations being made about going to net zero, every government has renewable as part of the strategy. But then we have this issue of supply chain. So what is your company doing to at least begin to anticipate or mitigate some of the challenges we see on the horizon with regards to supply chain for meeting the energy transition? Let's start with Alisdair and then we'll go to Tony.
Yeah, such a great question and a huge topic, isn't it? Really, mitigation is something that's ongoing every day for us. You know, I talked about holding enough stock and equipment. I talked about the need to get stakeholders and senior management engaged early. We've talked about digitization. We're actively working with our supplier Kinetics. They're looking at coming up with some really smart ways of using software. You know, for us as a relatively small company, you know, if we invest in software, it's a significant investment in terms of cost and people. So mitigation is something that I believe is going to change, you know, monthly in this situation. But the good thing I believe that's coming out of this is people were starting to think about mitigation in terms of innovation, in terms of better ways of doing things. Where, you know, I think if we can take one positive out of the pandemic, it's there's some really smart people thinking about smart things, and even within our organization and our contractors, there's some really good things going on. So you know, for us, it's just finding the balance between, you know, what are we trying to do in terms of supply chain? What can we do ourselves if possible? You know, because you could become to a fork in the road where you could definitely go down the wrong path, which could be a big risk for us. We need to be better at ordering equipment in advance of, so that, for example, that might mean better governance in terms of, you know, the cash flows have got to be there if you want to order the equipment well in advance. It may well be that we increase our stock even more. And that's a strong possibility at this point. So yeah, look, I can't give you a really firm set of ideas, but it's certainly the one message from me is it's got a lot of people thinking in a good way.
Tony, what about you?
Yeah, you know, so DTE is a founding member of the Electric Utility Industry Sustainable Supply Chain Alliance. And there's 22 of us utilities that belong to this alliance. And, you know, our job and our mission is to help to develop standards for sustainable supply chain processes and equipment, whatever it may be. So what we do is we work with various suppliers, various OEs around the country and around the world, and we do surveys. We try to understand how sustainable their processes and their products are. And then we all have moved towards having that part of our scorecards and the way we you know, make assessments as one of the aspects. And so this helps to drive that. Not only are we as a company moving towards more sustainable energy and aspects, but we also want our suppliers to do the same. Mm-hmm. And if they can do that, that's a differentiator for us, right? So it will buy more of your product, we'll buy more of your services if you practice sustainable supply chain practices, right? So I think that has helped to send the message that we're looking for emulation, we're looking for best practices. And, you know, we're trying to hold not only our suppliers to it, but also ourselves. So we're doing things within our buildings, within our real estate, to be more sustainable in what we do, along with producing more energy through renewable sources. So, it's just kind of that full scope.
Yeah, no. So I think this is good, and the point you mentioned about the supply chain alliance and sort of working together. Enrique, can you talk a little bit about, given the fact that Fortis is in many different countries, right? Do you guys consider your supply chain as a sort of a corporate entity across borders, or is everything done country by country?
Yeah, well, we're the way the Fortis model, which has been really successful, has been, we're sort of autonomous utilities, but we do consult with each other quite often, right? There's a benefit for us to be part of a larger organization, and one of the things that we just recently talked about was using that advantage that we have of being a larger, part of a larger group. And our suppliers look at us separately, right? So there are 10 utilities. We have separate contracts with them. I think one of the benefits that we want to sort of leverage is that they look at us as one Fortis company, right? Because we are, and it would be beneficial, right? Especially during times like this. But in terms of mitigating risks and so on, I think this can't be solved by procurement teams alone, right? It will require our business teams to collaborate more effectively and strategically. The traditional approach of just-in-time, design and material ordering will need to change, and we need to be sort of more forward-thinking. I think that's just absolutely critical, right? Besides the obvious increasing inventory and so on and so forth, we need to think couple years ahead, because that's how long it's going to take to get some of this critical material. The other thing I wanted to add too is that from an engineering perspective, we have to have less restrictive standards, right? So that's something that our engineering departments have to sort of wrap their head around. But I think that would also benefit in terms of mitigating risks.
So I think this is a very good segue into this whole topic of Chief Procurement Officer, Chief Sustainability Officer, Chief Resilience Officer. It's almost like you have to take a holistic approach at supply chain, at resilience, at sustainability, and put it all together. You can't have one group in the company. You can't blame Tony for everything because of procurement, because some of the constraints could be brought upon from the sustainability folks or from the resilience folks, right? So Tony, in that context of holistic thinking within the utility, how complicated is it to build that sort of a corporate understanding that we're all in this together? You first, and then I want to go back to Enrique, because I love to hear how Fortis does it across multiple companies to get this sort of alignment in terms of how we're going to go about dealing with our suppliers.
Yeah, Enrique touched on exactly, you can't do it alone. Not one of those, roles can do it by themselves. So it has to really start at the top to say, we're not just going to, move our generation in a direction. We want to move our entire company in a way that is more sustainable. And if you don't have that, then you're just kind of pushing the rock, and you're not going to get either a lot of support or a lot of pull. So, that takes time, right? And I think the pull comes from not only from the top of your organization, your CEO or your board of directors, but it also comes from your investors, right? Your investors have a large pull in what they believe and what they see that companies need to do. And we're seeing a lot more ESG type investors that are saying, oh, we're going to invest in you or we're not. And that carries a lot of weight for a publicly held company. So I think that is a big part of it. I think also affordability is a part of it, right? Our customers need to be able to buy our services and need to do it in an affordable way. We have a program that has helped with the pull from our customers as opposed to the push in regards to renewable energy. We call it My Green Power, and the My is MI for Michigan. And it literally basically goes to our residential customers and our industrial customers And we ask, do you want your energy to come from renewable sources, from solar, from wind, whatever it may be? And if that's the case, we can provide that. There's a slight premium to your rate, but if that's important to you, if it's important to you to have your household being powered by renewable energy, we can provide that. And that then spurs investment by our company to do more, right? Because we know our customers want more volume from these renewable sources. I think that's a good way because it does go right into affordability. When it's not going to necessarily be forced on you. It's one of these things that we want you to pull. And what we've seen is there is a good part of our customer population that wants renewable energy, and that just spurs the growth and the movement in that way. We'll obviously, meet what our governments, ask us to do, but it really does start from the stakeholders here, whether it's investors, it's our customers, it's our, heads of our organizations, and that really spurs our move.
Enrique, within Fortis, can you just quickly say a few words about this holistic planning, holistic organization around supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely benefits to being part of the Fortis group of companies and a larger organization in terms of best practices. We don't like reinventing the wheel, and some of the ideas that we have, I'm pretty sure that a lot of other utilities have within Fortis have come up with those ideas, and so we lean on each other in terms of best practices. In terms of supplier relationships and alliance partnerships that some of the larger utilities have, that benefits the smaller utilities like ourselves in terms of increasing our buying power and reducing our costs, improving our resiliency. And then the other thing too is expertise in renewables, right? There's a utility in Arizona, UNS, which is a Fortis utility that has the expertise in decommissioning, coal-fired plants and commissioning wind and solar onto the grid. And we have aspirations of doing the same thing as well here. We don't have coal-fired plants, but we are decommissioning our thermal generating station here, and so we're looking to add more wind and solar onto the grid, and so we can rely on the expertise at UNS in Arizona for that. And then in Northern Ontario, there's a Water-Nikiniat project where we're removing the reliance on diesel generation to First Nations communities in Northern Ontario and constructing a transmission system to access cleaner energy. And so again, expertise within the Fortis group that we can rely on to help smaller utilities accomplish some of these things that other Fortis utilities are doing.
Excellent. So we're getting a few questions before we go into the last set of 4 segments, if you may, which will be 5 minutes each. I want to ask you a question, Alisdair. So you heard Tony talk about the supply chain alliance that they've created with 20 other companies. I've been to New Zealand many times. I know the country well. Is there an opportunity to create a similar alliance between all the wires companies in New Zealand in terms of procurement and dealing with supply chain? Is that something you think will fly? Is it already happening?
I think I'll just give the others some context. We're a country of 5 million people, and we have over 25 electricity distribution businesses. So that's quite unusual, I would guess. We are in a fortunate situation where the majority of our generation normally is from renewables. So we've got a lot of hydro here. We do have some coal, but it's really only used for peaking. But it has been used a lot more of late due to dry weather conditions. Look, I don't think it's an option, Lawrence. We are working with the other EDBs. For example, I chair a group of the South Island supply chain folks, and we get together and we talk about how we can help each other, get some buying groups together, because clearly compared to you guys in the States and Canada, we are really small scale. So we have to be innovative, and New Zealand has always been innovative in that way. But getting back to Enrique's earlier point about engineering standards, every single lines company up and down New Zealand's got its own standards. So if we could start there, that would be a good way to segue into similar equipment being used up and down the country. And of course, that's going to be good for our customers at the end of the day, because supply chain issues, the drive for carbon free economies, the drive for sustainability is going to cost the customer, and we've got to be real careful about how we do that. But I think we can be a little bit more nimble here in New Zealand, and I'm certainly starting to see a lot of good conversations going on at the CEO level, at the engineering level, at the supply chain level. So I have hope that we are going to come out of this in a good way. But yeah, for me, it's keeping the cost down is the big thing.
Good. So you mentioned customer, and so did Tony. So let's get to the question around the fact that this supply chain issue is very complex. It has many factors to it. You have the geopolitical aspect, you have the geoeconomic aspects, national policy, and at the end of the day, we have to talk about this for customers, right? So how do we talk about supply chain in a way that customers will understand the complexity that it brings, but also the possibility that it could affect affordability? How do we have that conversation with our customers, with our regulators and others? Tony, you go first.
Wow. So I think you can really bring it home based on, things that are right at home, right? So I think we see things at grocery stores that not every grocery store has all the types of things that, it would typically have. We see higher prices at the gas pump right now. So you hear and see things about, if you're buying products online, that they may not get to you as quickly as they used to. Those are the same types of things that are affecting us, in a electricity production type world. So it's just more of a reckoning, and even for our professionals in the buying world, we have to understand and know what lead times are doing. So a lot of communication, a lot of, talking about what we see, a lot of information from economists, right? And what they predict and see. So it's a lot of transparency. I think that's the best thing we can do with our regulators and our customers, is to just talk about what's going on in the world and what's going on and how it affects literally the electric and gas companies. Oh, you have your mute on, Lawrence.
Sorry, apologies. So Tony, you talked about talking to customers and regulators. Enrique, you're in multiple countries, multiple regulatory environments. Just quickly, talk about the complexity in telling the story around why we need to invest in more resilient supply chains.
Yeah. So, regardless of where you are, reliance on safe and reliable electricity supply has always been important. Now throw in clean energy supply. All this costs money. Our industry is very capital intensive. There's load growth. There's a timely replacement of assets. There's the increasing reliance on electricity, for transportation, electric vehicles, space heating, increasing reliance on renewables to support, GHG targets and reduction targets and clean energy priorities. There's the increased investment in grid resiliency and storm hardening to combat a changing climate. So, regulators need to understand the impacts of these initiatives that are, driven by governments, supported by customers, and that there's going to be rate impacts because of these investments, right? And so they need to understand, regulators need to understand, utilities have no choice, when it comes to these things. We need to respond. We can't be unable to provide, electrical service. Unreliable service is not an option because of supply chain bottlenecks. They're not excuses. Electricity is a basic necessity, and with the reliance on it increasing to now electrification of the transportation industry as an example, the pressure is on for us to respond as utilities, right? Because we just have no other choice. It's gonna take time and a lot of money to have marginal improvement in reliability. Our customers, a lot more customers are working from home. Regulators need to know if we need to improve reliability, which most utilities have aspirations to. It's going to take time, right? And so I think it's having those frank and open conversations with our regulator and with our customers that we will respond, but it's gonna cost money.
Yeah. Well, look, I want to get into one aspect of the supply chain, and Alisdair mentioned it briefly, and I think also Tony, and it's the labor that's going to make this all work. There's a question of Vanessa, which I think is interesting because she ties in suppliers as part of this picture. Are your companies working with suppliers to address their own workforce constraints because the equipment is so critical for the energy system? So, I mean, in essence, how do we deal with the issue of workforce, both in terms of your company, but also the suppliers, to make sure we have what's needed? Alisdair, we start with you and then we go to Tony.
Sure. So yeah, look, even without the pandemic, we've got a developing skills shortage in this country. We've got I would call it an aging workforce. We you know, for example, in our company, we have some very senior engineers who you know, should have been retired a few years ago, for example, but they're still going. That's not a result of COVID, of course. It's something that we need to address really quickly. We have, at this point in time, for the last 18 months, we haven't been able to import any skills from overseas. New Zealand doesn't rely on, but a fair chunk of the skills come from overseas. In terms of the suppliers, well, as I said at the outset, most of our equipment comes from overseas. For example, we get 66 kV circuit breakers from a plant in Georgia. So can we influence, as a really small company, what they do over there? Well, luckily for the small companies in New Zealand, it's the larger companies like you guys that are forcing them to make sure they've got the right levels of skills and workers. So yeah, for us, the main issue is making sure that we train enough people to do the tasks, the linesmen, the jointers, etc. And Orion's been quite forward thinking in this area, so we've set up an energy academy. There's a website. It's energyacademy.co.nz. So please sign up and have a look at what we're doing. We're trying to engage New Zealand as one to attract and retain people in our industry, and that's been quite a shift in thinking. So we're not quite at the bottom of the cliff yet, but you know, we do need to attract people to the industry. For example, I go into my daughter, she's 17, go into her school and I say, who wants to join the electricity industry? None of them say me. They all want to join IS or you know, Cisco or whatever, you know. So no one wants to come into our industry. And why is that? Well, we need to figure out why, don't we? And we need to do it quickly.
Tony, any thoughts, Tony, on the labor supply chain issues?
You know, nothing directly yet. So we're constantly grinding right now and relying on relationship with our suppliers in order to get critical products, right? So trying to be first in line, trying to be, you know, first in the production line. That's typically how we've been addressing it. But you know, I would say in general, Alisdair's spot on. We're doing things here in order to bolster our own workforce, linemen, gas workers, things like that, because it takes training. It takes a lot of time and effort to get through apprenticeships and things like that. But we're recruiting and putting in similar academies and things like that in order to attract people to want to be in our industry. And it's difficult. It is difficult. But I also see light on the horizon. There's opportunity, and when that happens, you see new companies pop up and providing services and materials that never did before. So we just need to see who's going to take advantage of it.
Yes. Enrique, do you want to respond? Because if not, I have a very interesting question from Vivian I'd like to address, but go ahead and respond to that first on the labor supply chain issues.
Yeah, I guess I will just add that, today's workforce isn't going to be the same one that sees, net zero through to its conclusion, right? The next generation of workers will be in roles that currently don't exist today, and many in engineering, but also in more diverse disciplines like digitalization and data analytics and cybersecurity and so on and so forth. So incentivizing these workers to work in this industry will be key, like the others have said, right? And when I think about this question, the question I have is whether or not the pace envisioned by governments to a low carbon transition is too fast to attract the necessary skilled workers that are currently enrolled and motivated by the climate crisis, and those workers that will need to transition from the skills and experiences developed in conventional energy in the past to the construction of a new clean energy system, right? So I question whether that pace envisioned by governments is just too fast.
Interesting. The pace of the transition relative to the pace of generating the workforce to support the transition. So Vivian Brichelle has a very interesting question. It kind of ties into what you were talking about, Tony, regarding the supply chain and sustainability. And let me just try to sort of synthesize the question. In essence, it ties into a little bit of the ESG issues, because basically she's saying, as you work with your suppliers, much of the raw material for these, solar panels and elsewhere, many of them come from sub-Saharan Africa, where there might be issues around, labor laws, workers' abuse, and all of these things. To what extent are you, as you engage with your suppliers, trying to get them to take these ESG issues into consideration, especially when it comes to, say, critical minerals, say, from sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world?
We take it very highly. I mean, we put policies and procedures in place to, protect our company from breaking laws or being involved in any of these, social and governance type things. So absolutely, I think it's basically, if we know about it, we certainly aren't going to go forward with it. If we don't know about it, we're going to have problems, and we're not going to continue to buy from places or companies that utilize those types of materials. So it's very clear in regards to the governance and the policies and procedures we have in place at my company, for sure.
So here is one question from Bart Gagi. Bart asked the question: after years of outsourcing labor and services, electrical contractors, construction, excavators, and others, do you see a trend of vertically integrating insourcing to cope with the great investments that are coming? Who want to take that one? Maybe Enrique first, and then I'll see if Alisdair wants to chime in on that.
Yeah, I think it depends on your jurisdiction. I mean, there's got to be a business case to build, your workforce versus outsourcing. There's benefits to outsourcing that we don't need to get into, HR and costing and all that stuff. But I think it's a good point in that you need to build capacity within your company to be able to deal with electrification, right? And to deal with resiliency. You need to have some expertise in-house for sure. But again, it's hard to answer based on the jurisdiction. Outsourcing has benefits, right? And so I think I guess to answer the question, it needs to be a balance approach.
Alisdair?
Yeah, I guess the balance is right, but in our situation, we outsource the majority of our construction and maintenance works to a company, Kinetics, that we own, and we have a really close relationship with Kinetics. Many of the staff at Orion are formerly Kinetics staff, etc. So, we retain our engineering expertise in-house. For example, we set all of our standards in-house. We don't rely. We try not to rely on consultants too much for standardization and selection of equipment. We do use design consultants to put together detailed design for a new substation, for example. But Orion has benefited hugely from keeping the engineering skills in-house. Outsourcing, look, it's becoming quite expensive in this part of the world to use consultants. The competition is huge within the consultancies. We're seeing really senior consultants moving around from company to company to company. We got the big companies like Jacobs have moved here. So my view is that you should try and keep the technical skills in house as much as possible. But of course, as I say, kinetics, we have an interest in. They are growing a really strong workforce in the design area as well. So it's all about risk mitigation at the end of the day. I would hate for us to be in a position where we are relying on consultants for all of our technical decisions. That would not be a good space at this current time.
Yeah. We're going to wrap up with two questions. One of them is maybe your prediction, and that is, we've covered a lot of areas here in terms of supply chain. We've touched on a couple of risks, but from your perspective, what are we missing? Is there something that the whole industry in your country, in your company, that nobody is talking about? What is that one risk area you think we are missing that we should be focusing on? Tony, Enrique, and then Alisdair.
I think it has not dawned yet on our company in regards to the impact of inflation, the impact of potential equipment and material shortages. I think it's coming. We're slugging it out within the supply chain group, but I don't think we've seen the worst yet. I think it will continue to go. It'll bottom out at some point, and it's going to take, I think, another close to 2 years before we get some semblance of balance. So I think that, to me, is, we just don't know it yet. We're starting to feel it. We're starting to think about it, but it's going to get here sooner than we think.
Enrique?
Yeah, I think the industry, utilities, should be looking to become more resilient in our supply chain before we're mandated or ordered to do so. I think that's one thing. And then the other thing we touched upon is job creation. Will be key due to the lack of labor. We didn't talk about the shortages in truck driver. As an example, I heard a stat that there's 5,000 to 6,000, or maybe it was 50 to 60,000, truck driver shortages. So that's going to be, if that's true, that's going to hit us hard in the future. And then from a North American perspective, I would say that reducing our reliance on products and supply from Asia and Europe is also something that, if we don't do something about, will impact us.
Okay, Alisdair, and then thoughts, and then we have the last question for three of you.
Yeah, I think you guys have covered most of the risks, and we've talked extensively about them. I think obviously, from our point of view, I would predict that New Zealand will become, post-pandemic, will become quite an attractive place for people to grow. And I think the level of growth where we might get here in terms of decarbonisation, in terms of population growth, that's going to be the biggest risk for us. So we need to get all of those other things that we talked about, like supply chain and staff and all that sorted out. Regulation, well, regulation will probably follow what we do in general. I don't think we have to. I need to be careful what I say here. I think regulation will be rewritten to follow what the industry does. And I don't think there's going to be any choice there. But certainly there's a whole bunch of other technical risks, like system stability, that does worry me. So yeah, look, isn't it a great time to be in the industry? So yeah.
Well, let's wrap up. Let's wrap up on this last question. And this is maybe an easy one, I guess, but it requires your perspective, both as a citizen of the world, but also as an employee of your company, but also as someone in the industry. So we're going to Glasgow, and supply chain is certainly going to come up. So we'll start with Alisdair first. So we'll go Alisdair, Enrique, and then we'll end with Tony. So from your perspective, what would you consider as a success coming out of COP26, keeping in mind the focus on supply chain? What would you want to see that will make you feel that this whole conference was a success from a supply chain perspective?
Okay, I shall try and keep my political views out of this, but I would like to see some significant dialogue and agreement between the major manufacturing nations of the world. We are heavily relying on China, the US, others, doing the right thing for the world. And I think we've actually reached the point where if out of COP just comes words and no actions, I think it's going to be a significant problem for the world. There's been too much talk. We need to do something. Yeah, let's get. I have hope that that Biden will reach out to the others. That's what I'd like to see.
Excellent. Okay, Enrique, what's your key for success or KPI for success?
Yeah, I think there needs to be an acknowledgement, and if there was one in the past, a reassurance that suppliers and manufacturers, need to also be on board to reduce their carbon footprint, right? I mean, supply chain is responsible for a certain percentage of the sector's emissions, and should also be held accountable to do their part. Tony talked about that, and the GHG emissions that are embedded in every product available on the market today, I would say it's currently almost impossible to measure, which means that it's also extremely difficult to reduce if you can't measure it, right? So I would just say that holding the suppliers and manufacturers accountable to do their part in terms of reducing their carbon footprint.
Thank you. Tony, you get the last word.
Yeah, the colleagues on the panel here really hit it well. I think there needs to be clear messages and clear action that comes out of it, no matter what it is. I mean, I think part of the problem has been there's been just a lot of talk and not a lot of action that comes out of the conferences. So that's whatever it is, we will work it and do our best. But I just think just clear action, something that we all can rally around and do something with.
Well, Alisdair, Enrique, and Tony, thank you guys so much for your perspectives. I think we've covered a lot of grounds over this hour. I think what's important to recognize that this is a global issue. There is no one size fits all. There's no one country that has all the solutions. I think there's going to be a lot of sharing in this space. And I will certainly want to bring you all back sometime next year after COP and after we've seen whether there will be some action coming out of COP. And hopefully the supply chain issue will be one that we'll be dealing with and have a solution. So thank you all so much for your time. And Alisdair, good morning and be safe. I know you have to get back and hunker down. So thank you again. Vanessa, let me turn it over to you to give us the final wrap up here.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you again to Tony, Enrique, and Alisdair for joining us today and sharing their insights. And thank you to everyone for joining and asking so many thoughtful questions throughout the session. We will be sending out a recording to all attendees, which we will also be sharing on our YouTube channel, where you can find recordings from other past virtual conversations and webinars. We encourage you to register for other sessions in this webinar series by visiting tinyurl.com/EEI-COP26. Our Destination 2050 dialogues will continue tomorrow with a conversation on how to become nature-inspired leaders and communicators as we address climate change. We will also have sessions the week after COP26 to discuss finance, economics, and how to go from policy to action. To continue engaging with EEI international programs, please follow us on Twitter or visit our website. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of your day.